Okay, we got a backup plan for this, like, okay.
I love it when a plan comes together at the very last minute. So, Jared, are you going to lock the doors so that we're all locked in here together? Thank you. All right, we are here for IDR. We have an hour to get this done, and then we reconvene tomorrow. So we're going to start now. 1, 2, 3, go. Hopefully there are blue sheets circulating. Please do the right thing. I'm supposed to push this button here. There we go. We're getting toward the end of the week, so you've noted the note well many times, but nonetheless, please note it. I can't actually believe how many times I shouldn't even confess this on an open mic, but how many times I saw this before I actually went and read the RFC, and you know what? It was worth reading the RFC. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. This has been a eventful week for the chairs anyway, and that is being reflected in today's agenda and tomorrow's that have somewhat gotten rewritten on the fly. So just a couple things to set up talks that are coming later in the session. One is that, you know, we have been presented to several times now about route leak solutions from 2 major groups of authors. I think last time we talked about, hey, it would be awesome to take you guys who are almost converged but not quite and try to get you converged, and we're still almost but not quite. There is, you know, as in everything else in this game, there's semantics and there's syntax, right? And we love to talk about syntax. We love to dive down into packet diagrams, but we're really trying to push to come to conclusion on what the semantics of the solution are going to be. It would be, you know, our belief, the chair's belief is we're just about there. And then after that, there is an interesting discussion to have about syntax. So Sriram's talk, I'm hoping, will focus primarily on the questions of semantics. And I'm hoping the working group will engage either now at the mic or later on the mailing list to help us settle any remaining open questions. And then we can deal with the syntax stuff later. The syntax stuff is potentially a very attractive bike shed. I would prefer that we not paint it in this meeting today, but just, you know, in interest of full disclosure, the chairs and the authors had a meeting, was it just yesterday? And I don't remember who was responsible for throwing this idea out. It might have been me, or it might not. Maybe it was Alex. Of like, you know, we talked in the past about doing this with a community instead of a path attribute, and maybe we can really do this with a community and a bunch of configuration and make it into a BCP and send the whole darn thing over to grow. So maybe that will, maybe that will come back to haunt us. But it's a bike shed. I would prefer not to paint right now, but Kayor wants to tell us what color it will be.
No, I'm just waiting for you to get done because I have a question on the slide before this.
Okay.
Yes. Kayor Patel Arcus, not meaning to be rude, but this is a question for chairs. I think the presentation number 4, there was a mail out to the mailing list that this is not going to be adopted. Do we still need to present this?
Thank you for leading into my next slide. I didn't put him up to it, I promise. So another interesting thing that has happened over the last, well, couple of weeks during the working group adoption call, but also in the hallways and meeting rooms here, is, you know, we have had it fully bludgeoned into our heads that, number one, multiple working groups are interested in topics that you can generally lump under the heading of auto-discovery. Different people want to auto-discover different things, but there's a whole lot of overlap between it. Some people have very maximal proposals. Some people have very minimal proposals with interesting names. So it was also clear to us, as we said on the list, that we don't have consensus to move forward with a particular proposal. And not only that, we don't have consensus on, I hate requirements documents, but we don't have consensus on what our requirements are. So in a perfect world, we would have realized that a few weeks ago, solicited or prepared a talk on requirements, comparing and contrasting all of the proposals with a multicolored grid, but it's an imperfect world, and what we have is a prepared presentation on the proposal that this group has been discussing for a while. And also we invited Randy Bush to give a talk that he gave previously at LSVR, which is oriented towards LSVR, but I think it sets up a fair number of the requirements points pretty well. And, so that should be enough to get us started, and then we can move forward to, potentially hash things out better at an interim. Does that answer your question, KR?
No, actually. So if I can make a suggestion, this is just Keyur Patel speaking for myself. If we don't spend time on the solutions that are already decided by working group that we don't want to progress, that would be super.
Your suggestion is noted, but we're not taking it off the agenda. But we will move through it as quickly as possible. And I think that, we'll respect the fact that it's not an adopted proposal. So do you want to speak to this, sir? Do you want to speak to that?
Okay, so now we've come down to another thing the chairs want to confess, is that we're looking at the BGP data model. It looks like it's been NMDA'd, Network Management Data Store Architecture. It replaces the old model. In case any of you know, there was a model proposed by another set of authors, but they haven't gone forward with it. When they found they wanted to have it, they must have it MDMA. We're going to go to working group last call at the end of the meeting, so when you take a look at this draft, please, it'll be a short presentation, but beware, we are going to go to a working group last call. With that, I think we start our presentations. Jeff?
You probably noticed that we are also working on policy model that is not open config. It's IETF, and it has to work together with BGP. And there's some inconsistencies in between. It would be really good to meet and solve them.
Is RTWG finished with their routing policy model?
We are 60%.
50%? Well,
62.
maybe since we started, maybe it would be time to put that on a hot burner. Okay? So, shall we start with route leaks? Do we now have this in the room?
It's as good as it gets for now.
It's as good as it gets. Okay. Sriram,
Sriram, would you like the clicker?
you can have control.
So we still have 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you. So good evening. So we met the two sets of author teams met in London. We had a good meeting. Then we continued to discuss these things through email. Made some progress, but as John said, there is agreement to a merger solution, but not quite a complete agreement. So what I'm going to do today is, so we have the draft, and changes will happen still. It is because of the considerations of attribute versus community and other issues. We had so we have the draft and also a design discussion document. Please take a look at both of those. and offer some feedback. So quickly, like what's going to happen in this talk is that I should mention to you that Alex and I had the opportunity to meet face-to-face several times this week to go over the subtleties and the details. And so it's been a very good conversation between us and a lot of things clarified. And we are the kind of two team leads from the two drafts. So I should mention that there are some things where we have reached better understanding how to do things between the two of us. And because of that, some of the things in the slides may not be quite accurate, or we don't quite have agreement on those. I'll point those out. So we have design A, design B, and also the EOTC. So I want to mention those three things. The current EOTC proposal as it was the original EOTC. So so what we are trying to do here is that each AS in the path inserts what we call RLP information. So it could be in the form of, in design A, the AS number and an RLP value to indicate whether the update is being sent up to a provider or to a customer or a peer. So depending on that, it will set a 0-bit or a 1-bit. And in design B, it's simplified, smaller, it occupies less space, less memory. In this, nothing is set when the update is being propagated up. And AS number of the sending AS is inserted when the update is being sent to a customer or a peer. And the original EOTC design is similar to design B, except that it has room for only one AS number. So the very first AS that set a bit indicating it's going to a customer or peer, that stays. So that's the difference. So accordingly, as you go from left to right, design A to design B to the original EOTC, the amount of memory, the amount of processing potentially decreases, and the complexity decreases. But with design A and design B, there is more information that's being propagated in the RLP. And because of that, in terms of being able to detect multiple leaks, etc., there is better functionality. And then there is a trade-off also, like I mentioned before, with respect to the memory. So in this slide, I don't want to speak too much to it because it's kind of a busy slide. But the basic idea is that on the left, some things are happening that could happen in practice. And if you look at AS4, it can receive an update which has a route leak indication already set. But for whatever reasons, AS4 doesn't have an alternative. And because it's coming from a customer on a customer interface, in order not to cause unreachability, AS4 decides to accept it and propagate it as well. Then it goes to AS5, and at AS7, there are two routes being received, one from a peer and another one is a leak. It goes down into the customer, towards a customer, and then leaks. So with more information, like with design A or design B, you can tell more as to what happened. Both are leaks, but one is more egregious than the other, that kind of a thing. This is important. Alexander brought up this example where if you didn't have route leaks, you just have the traditional BGP. In this topology, you could have persistent oscillations if the providers, P2, for example, prefers P3's route over its customers, and P4 prefers P1's. In that case, if you do go by something like local pref, and that happens, then you would have persistent oscillations. And the same thing, once you bring in route leaks, and you just go with local pref without looking at the path length, for example, then again, you could have persistent oscillations. So there are a couple of ways to solve this problem. You would prefer P2 you would like P2 to prefer the customer route over the provider route in order to not have the persistent oscillations in case both are leaks. And for that, P2 has to be able to know that the route from P3 is a leak and route from P0 is a leak, and it has to prioritize the customer route over the provider route. There are a couple of ways to do it. One would be, for example, to check whether P0 is in the path of the provider route also. And if you know that, then you know that it is a detour of the customer route that is coming back through P3. And if you know that and both are leaks, then you would prefer the route through the customer. But Alexander has thought about it quite a bit, and there is possibly a better solution where you would have, in addition to the RLP values, you would have another attribute or value that is carried in the update, which indicates, for example, P0 will say that I saw a leak, but I don't have a choice. I don't have an alternative route. So I selected it and I sent it to the two providers. But at the same time, it has this additional attribute or information. It adds to the update to indicate that it was a leak, but I'm still propagating it. And with that information, P2 can now set the local pref to 0 on both of these routes, and then it will go with the longest path, and it will make the right decision, right selection, and we can avoid the oscillation. So with that, I can skip the next slide because I already covered that. So that's pretty much it in brief. So main thing we want to focus today is, if you have some feedback on design A or B, well, great, but that may change because we are considering very likely moving to large community. So we would like you to focus more on the, on today, if we can get some comments from you, suggestions about attributes versus large community, perhaps we can focus the discussion on that. Thank you.
That'd be exactly the opposite of what I was hoping for, but that's okay.
Huh?
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Jacob Heights, Cisco Systems. About a year ago, I put in a draft for another solution to this, which it sends a large community that says, these are my upstreams, and it sends it to the neighbor only. So that way, if that neighbor gets one from somewhere else, it can check whether that upstream is there or not. So did you see that? I mean, I was going to present it, but I didn't have enough time to update it. So.
Sorry, Alexander can possibly comment. He has an ISPA new draft. I wonder if there is an overlap between, maybe not.
But guys, I'm gonna call it here. The chairs really need a specific feedback that Shriram's got, and that's a great discussion with Shriram, but not on the question topic the chairs want to see. Do you see, if that was what you're trying to say in a different way, please say it. We just want to know, is there a utility for the additional information? We're talking about what's there. If that was part of your comment, I don't want to halt it. I just want you to be specific for the chairs. Yeah.
Alexander Azimov, one of the authors. So I just want to highlight why we are going to move from attribute to the community, the idea behind it. So attribute is better, but it will take years before the software will be shipped, installed, configured, and so on, so on, and so on. Now we have ASPA, which is much more powerful than anything that we can get with attribute, community, or whatever it is, because it's also capable to detect not only mistakes, but also malicious activity. And that's why we decided that we need something in place as soon as possible, and just before we will have ASP. If we will have an attribute or community, an attribute at the same time ASP will be delivered, it will make no sense. So at the same time, we know the limits of the communities. So it may be stripped. There will be some issues for sure. So please comment. It's not a choice for the draft. Some kind of strategic choice for the whole problem. So please advise.
Randy Bush, Arcus and IIJ. Luckily, communities are very strongly authenticated and integrity checked.
So that was, Joe, go ahead, please.
Job Snyder's entity, less snarky. It's no different for attributes like these. And we don't expect a ROP style attribute to propagate very far. It's more of if it happens to pass through you, you can benefit.
Would you say attribute propagates a longer distance than community?
Hey, everybody.
No, the point for this mythology to be effective is that it doesn't need to propagate very far.
So
If
I
it propagates in a limited radius, there's already benefit.
I would like to close this conversation right now. I'd like to encourage people to take advantage of the in-person time we have left to have hallway conversation or, over dinner or whatever. And I would like to encourage people to review the draft specifically with an eye toward the semantics and not the encodings. There are two different, design A, design B on that bullet there. You can very usefully provide feedback about, if you feel like the additional overhead of the one versus the other is warranted. There will likely be changes in the encodings coming down the road fairly shortly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Shriram. Shriram, I hate to ask you to put that, yeah. Gary, it's your turn.
Cool. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Kevit Patel, and I'm going to talk about the Yang model update. We have a new draft for BGP Yang models, which is now an NDMA compatible. We have removed in this draft, particularly all the dependencies that were there on the OpenConfig models. Brief introduction, if folks are looking at what NDMA is, it's an RFC 8342. There is the state machine, should be fairly clear. And most of the extensions that were there in base are already covered in the current draft. Whatever is defined in BGP extension drafts need to be taken care of, which is the next set of changes we will be doing, again in a separate document. That also includes the support for VPLS, EVPN, and L2 VPN, L3 VPN address family changes.
It will be an
BGP specific.
augmenting model, right?
Yeah. And I believe that's all I have. It's pretty straightforward.
AC Lyndon, this is a quick one we talked about offline where you were going to change it to augment IETF routing protocol list
Precisely.
instead of being at the top level.
Precisely.
Okay, thanks.
And all I was going to tell you was that the model compiles, thankfully. So we like to take it to last call if it's possible.
After that change though.
Yeah, okay. For sure.
Dhanendra Jain, Cisco. Same comment as AC about it needs to be linked under routing model under control plane protocols. And second question is, do you plan to define BGP RIB data, the BRIB structure?
Yeah, we can extend it.
In this one or in extension?
No, it has to be in the base one.
In the base one,
Yeah.
right? So I think that is completely not there right now. So hopefully, I think before work group last call. And the third is the RPCs are not defined.
IPCs or
RPCs, the clear actions.
Yeah. I think the clear should be taken it off on a separate track because the base model is only there to cover the base functionality, if you will, with the configurations.
Okay, thank you. And the last question is the policy extensions for services. You mentioned that a number of extension models.
Yeah.
So I assume that if they require any policy extensions, for example, BGP, VPN or VPLS, this base BGP model has a BGP policy module. So looks like the extensions for policy also will need to be thought about.
So the base model has just base policy modules in here, right? And for those, we have taken care of. For all the extended policies, would like to take it over into the extensions draft and progress the work accordingly. That way, at least we have base set of functionality moving forward.
Sure. So looks like if I get it right, all the extensions will define the BGP extensions plus the policy extensions together in the extension models.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Sure. Thank you.
And we'll be looking towards you to help us out as well, preferably since you asked all the questions.
Sure, we can discuss.
And Care, just to summarize, what was the one addition you felt had to go into the base model, or was there?
The RIB, BRIB.
Quick, Himanshu from Siena. Quick question on what kind of extensions you are including for BGP VPN and L2 VPN?
SAFI support and any BGP parameters that are there esoteric to EVPN.
Okay. Does the BGP EVPN model has to, because there is a separate Yang model for.
Yeah, and that would also, I mean, we will work with the separate Yang model if there is one to see that it's routing compatible and fits into the overall BGP framework. So we are happy to let that draft progress separately if need be.
Okay.
But the work needs to be done somewhere.
There will be no overlapping.
No, we don't. I don't think we expect any overlap.
Okay.
And if the work's done somewhere, happy to just document it and be done with it. Right? Not
Right.
looking for extra work to be done here.
Okay. Let's coordinate on that.
Yeah. Fair enough. Thanks so much.
Does it have a laser pointer? Is there a laser pointer? Oh, right.
Right.
Yeah.
Does not control the laser pointer.
Oh, sorry. We had 4 times.
Hey, I'm Jacob Heitz from Cisco, presenting extra extended communities. Okay. Extended. Why extended? We're making the extended community longer, and the reason for this is that we're going to be able to write the code very quickly, because it's just extending the extended communities. It's just taking the extended community code and just adding little bits and pieces to it, cut and paste it, and change the size. Why 24 bits, 24 octets, and why is it fixed length? Well, again, because we can write the code quickly. We do not want to make it variable length because we've seen what happens when we want to do variable length. It takes 16 years to get something variable length through the IETF, and it's still not through. Why bigger? We have when you auto-derive identifiers, you want to take existing identifiers and stick them together to make automatic identifiers, and to be able to fit those into anything, you need more space. So that's why that is. In a specific case, we needed that was in EVPN route target to put an ESI and an Ethernet tag ID and an AS number together all in one spot. In the current extended community, there's not enough space, so they have to be compressed. Or find new identifiers, which is not good for auto-config. Okay, now I added a couple more things, right? So we have transitive and non-transitive extended communities. There's been some issues with that. There's been several cases where we have wanted to have communities and extended communities go a few hops perhaps, but not throughout the whole internet, right? So leaking a community throughout the whole internet accidentally is a big deal. Right? So I thought, right, let's use 2 bits for transitivity, and so we can have 4 different transitivities, right? So now, the first one is administration transitive. That means it's transitive within a set of ASs that are perhaps owned by a single administration. Now, to make that happen, we add a configuration to a neighborship that is in the same administration. By default, there's always a different administration. Okay. The other one would be a one-time transitive. That means you can send a community to your neighbor AS, but it will not go to the next neighbor AS. So just one time. Right. Okay. LLGR stale. That was an example of a case where it could not be made transitive over more than one hop. And because it was not able to be done, BGP persistence has not been specified for IPv4 address family, just because we couldn't contain a community properly. So one-time transitive would have fixed that. The RT constraint. Because if we have a new extended community with new route targets in it, right, we need a new RT constraint. So there are several possible ways to handling this. So this is not nailed down, but I prefer, and some other people here seem to prefer, to have a new RT constraint address family. So it'll be nearly exactly the same as the current RT constraint. We'll just filter the extra extended communities where the regular RT constraint filters the regular extended communities. But now, since we had a new address family, I thought, oh, we have some other problems with RT constraint. Something that's been there for quite some time that hasn't been solved is what happens if you put an RT into a regular unicast IPv4 or IPv6 update, because RT constraint wasn't specified for that address family. It was only specified for VPNs. So if you have it in a non-VPN address family, what do you do? So there's no clear answer for that. So in this one, I just put an AFI-SAFI into it to say for the specified AFI-SAFI, we are specifying this RT constraint. Also, there's no reason why the route target value actually has to be a route target. It couldn't be any extended community and it would just work just fine. So I removed the need for it to be an actual named route target. Okay.
Are you close to the end because we're close to out of time?
Yeah. Okay. This is detail, just the types. We have AS specific, IPv4, IPv6 specific, EVPN specific. AS specific doesn't need to be 2 byte or 4 byte because there's enough bytes in there. Here are the EVPN subtypes. You can go and read them in the draft. I don't need to. Questions?
Real quick, Kevin Patel, Arcus. What happens if the working group thinks we need 30-byte community 6 months later? Will we define a new AFI-SAFI for another RTC?
Yes.
Okay. So if that's the thought process, my suggestion would be I know why. What was that? Wide or flexible communities?
Yeah, it was.
It started out as flexible, turned
Yeah.
into wide, turned into container.
And it's a working group document. I suggest we leverage this over that. Therefore, that way we only have one SAFI in future to worry about other things. The code changes now that you explained earlier in the presentation that the whites being too complicated to implement suddenly becomes very simpler.
Okay.
Jeff Haas, I think you know what half my comments are going to be. Sure, we can take the bit of the wide communities, the container. We already did the refactoring initially for looking at large. We could do that. That'd be one way to move forward. Let's stick to your presentation though. What I would like to be changed out of here minimally for this to move forward. I love that you did transitivity. Yay, let's do that. You're doing fixed bytes. I don't like that. The fact that you happen to have some union in your data structures that makes you want to have the specific size, that's your implementation. I don't have that in my implementation. Let's not do that. If you put just that length field at the beginning of it so that we can variable size them and say that this type must be this size, and you can do your parsing that way, that's great. I'm happy with that. Done. Do those two things, ship it.
Just FYI, line is closed after Job.
No variable length. It takes too long to write the code. It takes too long to specify. I did the large community.
Okay, so
No,
hey guys,
large
no
community went
food fight
to-
about this on the floor. Your various unreasonable positions have been noted and minuted.
Next.
Jorge Rabadan, Nokia. I'm very confused about your statement here at the bottom of the slide. You're saying that the new route targets are to be used in addition and not as a replacement. Is the intent, I mean, this statement, I guess, is valid until all your EVPMPs support this community.
Correct.
And at that point, you can only use the extended community, I mean, the extra extended community and not the other one. So when you end the migration of all the EVPMPs, you can actually get rid of the extended community and leave only the extra extended community. Otherwise, there is no gain, right?
You can only use the new ones if all of the EVPNPs understand the new ones.
And only those.
Yeah. Well, basically, there will be no conversion between the old and the new. I mean, you could say, if there's one that doesn't understand it, we'll convert back to an old one, but I wouldn't do that. So I would only put these in if all of the peers that need to understand them do understand them.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
I mean, you could, but it makes it complicated.
Yeah, but in that case, there is no
I'd like to ask
gain.
people, if you want to make a comment, make it into the mic. And by the way, the mic line is closed.
If you're gonna, anyway, if you send both on all the Ps, there is no gaining because the main advantage is the auto derivation. If you still need to configure manually the other route target.
Yeah. So everybody needs to understand all of the nodes in the network need to understand it, then you have your gain.
Job Snyders, NTT. I wanted to comment on the transitivity aspect because I think you're highlighting on a broader issue IDR and GROW have faced over the years. I know that Keyur and Jeff Haas and others have put out drafts about transitivity. Specifically, I would like to remind the working group that the reason the large community ended up not being contained within what was back then called the common header or the common container is that we could end up with a situation where it would be a legal construct that a large community may or not may be transitive. And from an operator perspective, when we went to market saying this is just like old communities, but it's bigger, that also meant that we wanted exactly the same transitivity. So I'm not clear on what the technical solution is, like you do here. So the outcome of what you define here is entirely reasonable. I would love these features. It would be really nice if we have pieces of encoding that would either stay within the ASN or just one hop. But how we solve this as a working group will be a challenge because if you put it on the attributes itself, it may be too broad and it will cover everything contained within the attribute. But if you do it per community or per color or per thingy, that may also not be ideal. But we have to keep in mind what users expect. And when we talk about, for instance, extra extended communities or large communities, people associate transitivity with that, and that we need to think ahead of pushing this to market on how we think the audience will perceive this.
Yeah, I understand there's many possible ways of handling attribute scoping.
Okay, you know what?
This one is my,
I'm going to have to cut it and ask you guys to, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for doing that.
So we're running about 10 minutes late, and I would like to ask Ketan if you can catch us up.
Catch us up in front of me.
Okay, so I'll go real fast. I think problem statement is known. I'm going to skip this. I'll spend some. Okay, it's not. So I'll just spend a bit on this slide, which is really the requirement that we had in mind on this. We're working on this draft. We're looking for a neighbor discovery mechanism for BGP, and which runs on top of IPv4 and IPv6. So it can work on any of this, any IPv4, v6 or dual stack, and supported authentication mechanism for security. Focused on BGP requirements because we have LLDP and BFD for liveliness and other discovery. So we just look for the BFD part of, BGP part of it. But we wanted to make this extensible for signaling of BGP information. The key requirement was for auto discovery of neighbors and bootstrapping for BGP TCP sessions between directly connected nodes. Based on feedback and even requirements, we wanted a separation of discovery and liveness for BGP neighbors. So there is a discovery part of it and the maintenance of the adjacency. And then based on feedback, the liveness mechanism is optional and can continue to leverage BGP keep alive, BFD, fast external failover features. And there's minimal changes for integration with the BGP PRFSM and no changes in the BGP protocol operations. So I think many of you, I hope, would have already seen this. So I'm going to skip through this really fast to catch up. There is UDP hello messages sent on a per link basis, and we exchange, So this is a hello message which is use port UDP port 179, and it's sent to link local addresses. So it can be used over both IPv4 and v6. There are the key TLVs that are used here. One is the peering address, so that the directly connected neighbors can learn the address to which set up the BGP TCP session. Then there is the link attributes, which indicates the IPv4 and v6 addresses and identifiers, so that the link can be described accurately in BGP-LS. But also we can do some other checking like subnet matching and any other policies that we may want to keep. There is a neighbor TLV, which actually includes the discovered neighbors and their status. This is to ensure a two-way, acceptance before bringing up the BGP peering over it, because the session, a neighbor may be rejected for some policy reason. There are certain optional TLVs. Key one is the local prefix TLV. This is really the prefix route that needs to be programmed via this neighbor discovery mechanism to ensure that there is reachability between the loopback addresses when doing the peering over them. It's not required when the peering is done with interface addresses. This is an adjacency state machine. Just a quick overview of that. It's very similar to some of the link like protocols like OSPF, for example. Key thing is that there is a verification to ensure two-way state.
Ketan, let's skip the state machine. And
So I think.
Yeah, I think mainly what we were hoping for was captured in your first few slides, which I think summarized requirements as you see them, and that was very helpful, and the details of the proposal aren't needed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's Comic Sans time.
Okay, link discovery and liveness, what do we really need? We're here and we're trying to discover our neighbors. Okay. IIJ is building a second medium scale data center with 6,000 racks. How can we route in something of this scale? OSPF is okay to 500 nodes, ISIS maybe 1,000. They're limited because they repeatedly flood everything. This is your class on OSPF or ISIS. Thank you, Miyazaki. BGP is great as updates are infrequent. It only signals change. Okay, it scales because of that. So therefore, this is probably the major reason it's become common in large-scale data centers. But ECMP can be wider than heck. Okay, so discovery and topology become critical. The problem is discovering it. Okay. So a little religion first. If anybody can help me attribute this, by the way, I would really appreciate it. There's the union standards, the accumulation of all the features everybody wanted, and intersection standards, only those things everybody absolutely had to have. I'm a fan of the latter. When Russ Housley was talking to the ITU for the IETF, he said, let me understand it. You add features until the no's stop. And they said, well, we don't like to think of it that way. But that's in fact what happens. So let's not do that. What are the must-haves? We want to discover the nodes and the links between them. We want to discover the link encapsulations on those interfaces and only on those interfaces. We're not trying to do routing. We want to maintain layer 2 liveness, and Sue and I have a confusion here. And what I really mean is the layer 2 is up, not layer 3. You've got BFD and other things for that. But if layer 2 changes, it needs to be signaled very quickly. And then a northbound API, this whole thing was done for BGP SPF. There are other paths. Security, I've been told data center ops don't think of security at this layer. I don't think that's reasonable, and some have finally spoken up. Certainly we need authentication. Is my neighbor the person, the node that I think it is? Is it authenticated to talk to me over this interface? Do we need integrity? That I question. But this is one of the things that may drive the PDUs over 1,500 bytes. Why do I care about that? Wait a minute. Non-features. Routing data, BGP does that. Up the next layer up. Access to IGP databases. This is discovery and liveness, not routing. I contend you don't even need an IGP. You just want the link, not transport. You want discovery and liveness to push up to BGP SPF. It's got to be usable in massively scalable networks. It may be useful for other applications, and it should be simple. It should be extensible so that we can add authentication, maybe link costs, et cetera, et cetera. John and I have been discussing adding what's the flavor of my neighbor. Is it a spine? Is it a leaf? Et cetera. So I think of that as colors. And we might have two of them, the other fonts, so I can have Magenta Comic Sans. It should be simple. It should not have IPR. And I didn't have enough room on the slide to include simple again. Why simple? Is because we're here to produce implementable, understood, and securable standards, not build our resumes. And I feel really nastily strongly about this. And Rob Pike, one of the fathers of Plan 9 and other Bell Lab stuff, had this to say just 2 weeks ago, that the high goal of software engineering is removing the need for features. So what are the candidates we have in front of us today? We have LLDP. We have something like ISIS link discovery. Alvaro tossed edge control protocol over the fence at me, and I think he regrets it because I've been teasing him about it ever since. BGP neighbor auto discovery, you've just heard that song. And something that I've been working on with KR link state over Ether. LDP is an IEEE protocol, and now the magic number 1500 appears. You could want a big PDU and you hit IPR. Okay, it's a bit complex. In some circumstances, it won't go through a switch. In others, it will. What do you really want here? Are the nodes switches? In which case, you really don't want it to go through a switch. It does beaconing, but not keep alives. It's viable. Okay. ISIS discovery, at least it's an IETF protocol. It's complex enough. The BGPLS was invented so people who are allergic to link state databases can see it in a different form. I only read BGP, so please translate the ISIS and OSPF LSDBs to me. This is pretty silly. ISIS is not commonly implemented right on MSDC devices. RFC 1812, I think it is. Host requirements didn't include ISIS. It was OSPF. Edge control protocol, it's a transport controlled by IEEE. It's really a transport, it's a layer 2 transport. It does flow control, reliability, non-reorder. It's reinventing TCP. Thanks, Alvaro, at least I got to read something. BGP neighbor auto discovery is introduced in IETF, very new, needs the peering address to get the peering address. It's AS based, can't use other identifiers. Not really discovery at all, it's configuration and doesn't maintain liveness. Link state over Ether was custom made for the LSVR job. Let's be specific. Very bare bones, brutally simple, only does discovery and liveness. It's new, but so is BGP SPF, and no measurement and monitoring tools. And that line kind of applies to too many things here. Right. So this is kind of what it looks like. And let's discuss it.
I think the only thing I mentioned in the LSVR was the ESIS protocol. And by the way, since you said L2 liveliness, I withdraw my other timeliness comment. You'll either make it or you won't with the liveliness at layer 2. So we're good.
We gonna go home early? You that hungry?
So we do have a few minutes for conversation. Yeah, I guess really what I said at the beginning, we have, I mean, sure, we don't normally hum in this room, but let's hum. Hum if you think the general topic as presented in the last two presentations and others that have come to us of discovery in the BGP context is one that this group should work on. And hum if you think that we should not work on the topic. It's very quiet. Okay. Okay, I heard a little humming, but very little. So that, I mean, that was our impression. I guess the other thing that I would like some hummy ratification on is it is the chair's impression that we are at the beginning rather than the end of defining what we think our IDR's requirements are for discovery. We don't think that we have a solid set of requirements yet. So I'd just like to get a hum if you pretty much agree with that statement that we do not yet know what our requirements are. Okay, I heard some humming. Hum if you do think we have firm enough requirements to start writing a spec. Okay, that's interesting. That's, you know, pretty close, pretty close.
With those volunteers?
So yeah, actually it was a trick question because in either case, that means that you would like to participate in a interim to nail down what those requirements are. Half of you have got some requirements to bring to the table, and half of you have got a interest in evaluating the requirements of the first half. And now I would like to open the mic.
Jeff has 2 points in reverse order. So Randy's motivation for presentation is partially due to LSVR that has a liveness requirement. We do not have that piece. That may bias the solution if we're trying to be general. Second comment is I think that the majority of the solutions that have been offered in this space have significant overlap, so I don't think we're really that far in terms of the actual requirements. I do think that we have a few details like the LLTP draft, for example, is out there because we thought we had a specific limitation that we needed, you know, for data center type equipment that the general BGP solution doesn't. I don't see that as an obstacle. I just see that as, you know, one of the things that needs to be answered.
K. Patel Arkas, I agree to what Jeff says. The only thing I would add is if we are going to take this work, we probably want to think of this work with an understanding that this has an applicability to MSDCs, but can be generally applied and could be applied even beyond BGP in certain cases. I'll think BFD-like mechanism, which is more generically applied. So have a surgical insertion point from a network perspective in mind, but make it a generic.
Sure, and I'll just cut in to point out that, of course, LSVR has their own requirements, and the AD has, I think, very sensibly asked, you know, the chairs of the two groups to get together and basically said, you know, can't you people figure out how to bring forward one thing instead of two things? So we have had some request, not a hard requirement, but a request to try to come up with unified proposal instead of two different proposals that do almost the same thing.
Yeah, Rajiv Asari. Definitely this, at least Randy's analysis, very useful. One thing that hit me while I was thinking about it, that most of the large-scale data centers, if they're being built or going to be built, are predominantly going to be around IPv6. I hope that's the case, Randy. So that, I mean, if you make that assumption or don't make that assumption, it would be useful to leverage something that we have in IPv6, neighbor discovery. Does it check, does it pass all the marks? I'm not sure. Would be useful to have at least that be added to the analysis.
Actually, I'll say
AC Lindum, there are specific, the requirements have a lot more than that. That's already being done. There are implementations that use the IPv6 router advertisements to peer on the link local address and then use RFC 5549 to do both IPv4 and IPv6. Yeah.
Okay, neat, thanks for
But that's only that's limited, doesn't meet all the requirements.
And so what my request and suggestion was to perhaps expand this list and add IPv6 as well, IPv6 NDP to be more specific.
Okay, and I actually also want to, take privilege to respond a little bit and just say, although this grid, is what it is, and it's a useful grid, we should keep in mind that you can have a set of requirements that are then met by a set of technologies. They don't have to be met necessarily by just one technology, one protocol.
Yeah.
AC Lindum, I'd just like to point out to this group that Randy's liveliness requirement is not BGP session liveliness, so don't confuse that. We're not solving that with this. It's liveliness of IPv4, IPv6, and possibly other end caps on the link.
In fact,
Liveness, okay, liveness of the link.
Ether liveness.
That's where we got confused.
For very selfish reasons, I would rather the IDR not take this up because LSVR has a nice constrained problem, and I like working on it. This group can expand to the interplanetary universe and drive me crazy for years.
we love you too.
Ali suggested Cisco. With respect to the LLDP option, I'm wondering whether jumbo frame size have been considered for LLDP, unless we think that we're going to go over 8-9K in size.
So I believe Randy had a bullet to that about IPR and greater than 1,500 bytes and blah, blah, blah.
Well, I thought that IPI is with respect to the segmentation, segmenting it to the multiple pieces, not using a single jumbo frame.
Okay, well, I guess I will defer that to people who know more about it than I do. So, Keir, we'll take your comment, but I want to point out that we're out of time, so yours will be the last comment.
Sure, I'm just going to reply really quick to Ali's comment. Jumbo frames is good to have, but not necessarily the way of doing it. And then, as Randy said, there are other issues with LLDP where, it goes through a switch. You may not want to, you may not want this information to go beyond one hop. So putting extra constraints seems like adding more complexity here.
So, okay, and with that, we will close the meeting. We probably, I'm almost certain we will try to schedule an interim to talk about this topic. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.